I knew you would like that.
Ready? Welcome to Kelly House. On your chairs, we have both an attendee questionnaire, which deals with the Sunday afternoon program in general. It's not a specific, a critique for any specific program. If you could fill those out. And also a green card that lists this year's speakers that we have. Kelly House presents a Sunday afternoon with the fourth Sunday of every month from April through October. And it's a chance to reminisce, discuss, and share local history, including recent history. It's a casual atmosphere. It's a give and take, the audience and our speakers. Today we have 4 local merchants and a retired baker. They're going to talk about what it was like setting up shop in the 70s and 80s. And we have Ed O'Brien from Compass Rose, Glen Ricard from Circa, Susan Cimmiyotti, Panache, Skip Maclaren, Reflections, and everybody knows Erich. So if you want to start by all just saying a little bit about yourselves, and then 4 merchants and a banker.
Okay, I guess I'll start it off. I'm Erich Schmid, and I retired from Savings Bank about a year and a couple months ago, having arrived here in 1978 and retiring in 2009. I love it. I'm staying, and I'm staying right here.
Skip Maclaren. I flunked retirement, so I'm back in retail again. I had the melting pot started in the Heiser house, and as an architect restored the building on the corner. At that time, RO bought the Heiser property to expand the hotel, which meant we didn't have a lease, so he was much more happy to have somebody go into the new building. So we went from 2,300 square feet to 5,500 square feet, which was a major learning curve. And then through the years, it seemed like every time I thought of something, we would open another business or two. So I've had the body experience, the melting pot, Sky's No Limit, which is now the toy store. And now it's Reflections, and I think this is the end because it's 600 square feet. I have no employees. It's wonderful.
Hi, I'm Susan Cimmiyotti, and I started in 1984, and it was in the Beacon building with Daffy Hervela, and she did the lingerie, and I was in front with jewelry. And then I was there maybe a year and 3 months, then I moved down the street to a water tower, and I was there for maybe 9 months. And I forgot the process. After being in business 3 months, I opened another gallery down at the Heritage House, and I was there until 1996. So then from the water tower, I was very pregnant at the time. I moved to Main Street.
Sitting right over there.
So they were moving like our jewelry cases down the street, and people were taking bets. I'd deliver right on the spot. It was huge. So I've been on Main Street. First location was Bob Raymond's building. I was there 12 years. And then I was 11 years in the Saka Gallery building. And then now we're in our current location, which was the OC Cottage, which is our final resting places there. And on Caston Street, we bought that in '94, and so we've been there a while. We're going to stay there also. Started out with estate jewelry, and then from there we've added original art, art glass, furniture, gone into designer jewelry. And also during the early 90s, we also had I don't know why, but we bought a building in Benton, Oregon. And so I spent every weekend driving up there, and I put like 100,000 miles on my car. So we did that for 2 years, and I thought, this is not good. So we sold the building, closed the business, and that was wonderful. I have 3 employees, which I all adore, and then my son works for me. Yes, my son works for me once in a while when he's not teaching. But it has been, it's been a wonderful experience.
I'm Glen Ricard. I moved to Mendocino in 1970, started with a toy store called Colorform. My wife at the time wasn't that excited about running a toy store, so we opened a clothing store called Circa. And fooled around with the men's boutique inside the women's boutique. Opened a men's store. And in between that time, I had an antique store when I bought a building on Main Street. There was an antique store in it, so I took over the antique store at the same time, operated all of them. In the late 1970s, there wasn't anybody really in competition, so we opened a second clothing store called Ragtime Clothing Company. And all of them were operating. By this time, I'd sold off the antique store, and we just ran the other stores together. After that, I opened a fixed base operation at the airport, car rentals, aircraft rentals, instruction. Then decided I didn't want to do it anymore, so my lovely wife took over Circa, and she's been operating it for quite some time.
I'm Ed O'Brien, and I came to Mendocino looking for a place to do business. And I had no business experience. I was 22 years old, and it looked like a nice place. And I based that on the fact that people actually got out of their car and walked around. And most of the other places that I really liked, that didn't happen. Big Sur, West Marin. It was a great place to be, but you had to have some place that people would actually walk around and look at things. And so I rented my first shop from Miles Paoli up on Ukiah Street. And it was a very bad business location, and it was one of the best educations I've ever had. I paid dearly for it, but it was good because there was very little pressure. The business was pretty lackadaisical. Most businesses at that time were. Most businesses, yeah, they went away to Mexico. They went away sometimes by just sitting there. It was quite common to have people just close up for no apparent reason. I learned what made a business work and what made it didn't. And so I was very happy to move into my present location. It's a better business spot, and I did that in '81. And it's a nice place to be. It's always maybe third recession now, maybe fourth, depends on how you count them. So, but unlike the rest of the United States, it's always a recession here in the wintertime. And it's, everybody gets used to the idea that nobody has money. So it's not that big a deal. It is hard on some businesses that just started this last couple of years because they have, they don't have a following, or they're not prepared for exactly how slow it can get. And that's probably why you saw some of the failures that you did this last couple of years. It seems like people are back, and they're back to spending some. They just don't have quite as much money as they used to. So.
Well, the thing I remember though, it's different now. We can't take January off. Any dollar that kind of floats across the counter is better than going to Hawaii for 4 weeks. You know, I mean that was wonderful in the '70s. I mean, you only worked 11 months a year, and you had customers 6. So, you know, it was a great existence here.
When I got here, I remember the busiest place in town was the Seagull. It had cars all the
yes.
time. Otherwise, there weren't even any cars on Main Street or anything else in the beginning. So anybody have any questions out there, please just go ahead and ask the questions. That's the best. I've got some questions here that was given to me. When did you first open your store, which I think all of us have pretty much done. Have you had any other stores here or elsewhere? Anybody other than Mendocino?
I listed all 4 I've had.
Well, you had Brandon,
Oregon.
Oregon.
I had some before I moved here, but you know, that was
Right.
part.
Probably a biggie for all of us, what brought us here to Mendocino? And for myself, I came up here with a friend to supposedly dive for abalone. I'm not a diver, but it happened to be, you could pick them off the rocks at that time. So I came up here and went down the cliff with everybody, and but was not really into picking for the abalone, and kind of watched what was going on, but decided, while they all did that, I came back up the cliff and decided to come into Mendocino because I had heard that they were looking for a branch manager in Mendocino. The Savings Bank of Mendocino was looking for a branch manager. The one that had opened the branch in November of '77 had retired in March of '78. This was May of '78 when I was up here. And so I walked in town, and it was a Sunday, as I remember, and there was nothing going on. It was really quiet, very quiet. But I looked through windows and went to Mendoza's, they were open, and went to Corners. Corners was open, and looked in through the bank's windows and said, boy, what a cute little bank, a lot different. At that point, I was working in Sausalito for the Bank of Marin, which was a good place to work also. So I really liked it, and I went back and decided to see if I could get the job, sent a resume, came and talked to them several times, and they offered me $700 a month, and they weren't going to move me or anything else to come up here. Well, I kind of held out for a couple hundred more. And eventually made it up here in August of '78, and it was the best move I ever made. And I've stayed almost 32 years now. So that's what got me here.
Well, I remember your predecessor when we were.
You probably, several of you do.
But the classic thing I remembered is that we were doing this big move, and it was like a major dollars amounts that we needed to do
Oh,
this.
I remember that, right.
And in fact, it was approaching $60,000, which back in those days in Mendocino seemed to be a lot of money to go doing. And
Still
I was
is.
I was up talking to him first in Fort Bragg, because he had been
He was
up
the
there.
mayor up there, right?
Lou, I think.
Right, Lou Sobrano.
Lou Sobrano. The funny part about this gentleman is he would never look you in the eyes. It was so difficult to ever negotiate with him because he just would not look you in the eye.
But he was a good banker.
He was a great banker. Because, well, and there I found that if you know the Fort Bragg, there's windows. I went and sat my butt on the window because that's where he would stare out the window rather than across the desk. But bless his heart, when I told him how much money we needed, he says, I don't know that that's going to be enough to really do the job. Maybe you better get so-and-so, which is what we did. And bless his heart, it was a major jump to go from the old hippie Heiser house to class fixtures being built and all of those kinds of things over here. And if it hadn't been for Lou,
Right.
it would not have happened. And then throughout the years, bless his heart, he would also come through following one of those recessions or two to bail us out.
Skip was shocked about how many light bulbs he had to buy just to keep them.
The first, well, you gotta remember, I came up here first as an architect because I had become, I was an acute care architect doing major medical facilities, and it was like, the turnaround time aesthetically was involved, and by the time a building goes under construction, you've done 6 other different things, and so I wanted to come up here and do residences and have a more personal relationship with my client. The only thing was, in the '70s, there wasn't enough people living up here who wanted to have a house designed, and there were some building designers that were absolutely outstanding in the area and had the reputation, and most people used them. And so I kind of slid through the back door into doing the retail thing. But the little spa that's on the back of the Heiser house now for the hotel was my office. I had a little architectural office because I did do stuff around town, the hotel garden and the building over here with Tote Fat and all of that, when.
My neighbor's house, the Stans.
The stand,
Right.
yeah, yeah. And then the best house, I think, was Biage Katroki's house
Oh, yeah.
up on the hill that overlooks the bay. And then my real tour de force was, how do we put it? Bob McMillan. I won't explain any further, but it's a wonderful house across the street, across the bay, out on the point. Getting permission through the Coastal Commission was difficult because of the view down the highway and all of that. But it's a magnificent, extremely expensive house. The ceiling opens up over the spa and closes afterwards and all of that kind of thing. Interesting thing, and most of you who relate to Mendocino in the day, I would give him my invoice and then I would find a brown bag in my car.
Was it money?
Yeah. Moldy maybe, but it was money. Usually in 20s.
Yeah.
But that's Mendocino.
How about you, Susan? What brought you here?
It was my husband's job. He worked for Louisiana Pacific. And so when I came, my field was urban renewal. Couldn't get a job. So then I did bookkeeping service, Mary Lynn, back there in the beautiful purple, was one of my clients. Bob McMillan was also one of my clients. And I had to go to the bank with some of that smelly money and make deposits to cover the checks I was writing.
It was okay, we took it.
That was before the $10,000 limit.
Yeah.
And it was, I didn't realize you were the architect for Bob's house. It was a beautiful home. I go there several times a week. So then it just kind of doing books, you kind of get isolated. But I was able there to be home for our older son when he got off the bus. I worked the computer out of our house and then did a lot of driving. So then it was in '84, I thought retail looked like fun. And it was, I don't know if it still is.
Looked like fun.
And you can never be relaxed as a small business person. But there are a lot of nice moments. It's a lot of hours, a lot of stress, and think what else I would do that I love more.
Well, I first discovered Mendocino in 1965. I was up on a weekend outing with a friend, and Mendocino at that time was really
Yes.
nothing. I mean, it was, the Bank of America was the last, open building on the west end of Main Street. Or maybe Zonka was there, but and then there was, he wasn't there yet? Okay. But there was only Homer's Market, the post office was on Main Street, and if you ran through the hotel, you'd get seasick because the floor was.
And the beds in the upstairs.
Oh, no, I didn't dare go upstairs. If you dropped something, it would roll to the furthest corner. But then I returned. I had a friend at the time. I wanted to move out of the city. I was from Santa Monica in Southern California. So I said, well, this is. I remembered Mendocino, and I came up and looked around, and I had a toy store in Santa Monica at the time, and just sort of investigated whether there was a possibility of putting one in here. So I fooled around and came back a few times and ended up renting a house that I thought I could do the business in, but it was on the other end of the street. So I discovered on one of the trips that this is where we had to be. So I rented the little place that's now the Gems and Jellies to start with. We outgrew it within about 3 months and moved into the location where the Circle Men's store is. And I had an option on the building to buy the building at the time. And a loose Sobrano story was that one of my employees that work in Circa knew the president of Savings Bank, and he came over on a weekend and they were talking, and she talked about me, and he introduced me to her. He said, go over and see my banker on Monday. And I said, well, I don't know what I need. So he said, just go over and talk to him. So I went over, and same thing, Lou's looking out the window. He said, what do you need? And I said, well, I don't know. What do you got? So
How much you got?
he says, well, do you have any ideas of what you'd want to do? And I said, yeah, there's a few things I'd like to do. And he said, how much money are we talking about? He said, 10 or 20. So I said, okay, let's try 10. So he he had the papers out and he just draws lines through the whole thing and signs it on the bottom. He says, tell me how to spell your name, and that was it.
It was nice in those days. A
Several,
lot different,
Yeah.
different now.
so
Right.
he didn't know what a monster he created because I started buying buildings
I
and
remember.
remodeling them.
Yeah.
So I went back to see Lou quite a few times. And then the shocker was when Erich came to town. He says, we've got to get some information about you.
I had a lot of customers like
We don't know your social
You
security
didn't have an
number.
application, right?
And I looked at the files and I said, he had all these reports that I'd never filled out before. So I didn't even know what he was.
That's what happens when those big city bankers.
I know. Spoiled everything,
Yeah.
But those were the good old days.
Yeah.
Well, I forgot to mention that when I started out, I had to go to Erich for money.
Uh-huh.
And so I had to walk in with all my his stock that he had. And so traded in all the stock for a loan. And, I'm so naive, I wasn't nervous or worried. I just thought everything worked out fine.
And did it?
So far.
Just in the nick of time.
Okay, Ed.
Well, my business didn't need banks.
No, you
We
didn't.
didn't do banks.
What kind of business is that?
It was a very small business. I bought my business.
I called on you though several
It's
times.
true.
Right.
But it's just one of those things where it was that small, it was that inexpensive to start a business. We made our stock, so we didn't need to buy a whole lot. We did really go on a cash and carry basis on almost everything. I got my first charge account from anything from Sandy Sandboth. And
In fact, I think I
at
did too.
Mendoza's, yeah. And it was just a different time when things, it seems like it was expensive at the time, but things were very inexpensive. Rents were $75 to $150 a month. Houses were selling for, when I got here in 1970, for $10, $12, $30,000. It was a very big house. So, you could get by on a very small investment and a very small amount of money, which was really good because, as we were talking about, in the wintertime, there was just nobody here. The first winter, I really would have gone bankrupt had I understood the concept. It was absolutely flat road, and we were eating things out of the garden that had been there since the last year. It was really, it would have been depressing, except we were relatively ignorant. And it was the case of everybody that was in town was in that same boat, so it didn't seem that unusual. I think that's kind of how a lot of people describe the Depression. If everybody's poor, it's not that bad. And especially since where I was over with Miles Paoli's building, it was not exactly the hub of commerce, which is interesting because the hub of commerce at that time really was Betty Dostal's building, where the bookstore is now.
Yes.
That was the main corner. It only went up a little ways, a block and a half, and if you were real generous, you'd say it went over to my shop. There was nothing on Ukiah Street of real interest.
Mendoza's.
But I mean,
Yeah.
for folks walking around. Lansing Street was
Lansing, yeah.
was empty also.
Yeah.
And Main Street did stop. Even nothing was up in this direction.
The Seagull was then there.
The Seagull was absolutely,
Right.
and that was another center, but it was the Kelly Owen Hall was empty.
Empty, right.
The Red Baptist Church was empty. There was a lot of empty buildings in town.
Mm-hmm.
You would say a lot of potential, but there was just plain empty buildings. There was numerous boarded up buildings on Main Street. This is in winter of 70, 71. So it was,
Didn't you get a few of those, Len? A few of those buildings? Yeah. Back in the late 70s, you had a few of them anyway.
yeah, and so there's the level of commerce in this town was really small. And before you got here, just so everybody knows, there was a Bank of America.
Yes, there was.
And the Bank of America was open from 10 to 2.
Yeah.
And they had 2 tellers. There was never a line.
Yeah.
From 72 to like 79, when we did the move, we didn't do any loans. We did the business because actually we were doing bottle cutting and filling them with wax and making wind chimes and all of those kind of things. And guess what? We went to all the bars and we got the bottles free. So I mean, yeah, it was just our effort to make things out of this free
Those big wine
stuff.
bottles
Like,
came out of your house.
yeah. Those were only the gallon ones with the screw tops.
Carlo, what?
Exactly, yeah.
Does kind of predate. the
But then
wine.
Mary Lynn's mom opened Personal Expressions on the back end of the melting pot. We had been on the back end when there was, oh God, who was the guy that did the theater stuff up front? The Cape and whatever. But he went out on the darkness of night one night, and so we then moved up to the front end. And that was actually, like Ed said, Dostal's was the heart of Mendocino. And so being around the corner on that Caston and Albion corner was a great location for those few people that had the guts to walk around the block, because they at least came into the melting pot.
Where was Dostal's again?
Dostal's was the bookstore.
Where the bookstore is now.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Betty did the glass stuff, and her husband was in fact a watchmaker and a clock expert, and they had some magnificent clocks, you know, in there.
Yeah.
She also owned the laundromat.
Well, they also own where Ed is currently, and that used to be half the fun of being in the melting pot, because Mrs. Dostal had some very strange personality quirks about people in the laundromat and folding clothes and things like that, and all of a sudden you'd hear this screaming and shouting and clothes being thrown out the door and her locking the door. But that was when we had quote-unquote sufficient water to have laundromats in town.
But in her defense, there were some times when people didn't have excess clothing, so they would wash all their clothes.
As a voyeur, it wasn't so bad. That's right. But the nice thing, biggest thing that I remember about that period of time in Mendocino was that was when Mendocino really was a community where people cared for one another, covered each other's backs. I mean, it was really fun living here because we were all together. And then actually up to about the 80s. The 80s is when everything went downhill, and then part of the thing I think I've always thought is when they ran cable down the highway, that blew the interaction and interpersonal things, because we used to, the Seagull was the place.
Right.
I mean, we'd go in there at 5 o'clock and we'd close, and you might have 2 drinks because you couldn't afford any more than that, and you left at 2. But by God, did you have a good time. I mean, it was like the old college days of, you know, sex, politics, and religion, and guaranteed that conversation's going to happen, you know.
You forgot Dick Chickies.
Well, yeah, but Pete had the way, bless his heart, you know, that lull in a bar. If there's
We all
nobody
went there
around
Friday
at
night.
5 o'clock, he locked the door.
Actually, Friday nights, both banks went there, B of A and Savings Bank. When we would close, we would meet down at this place, have a beer or whatever.
Well, there was only one time in my art career that we pulled from Savings Bank was I was doing remodeling on the house, and Eric had all this paperwork, and he wanted this and that and the other thing. And Bank
You
of
ain't seen nothing now.
Oh, I know, excuse me, I know that, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But Bank of America would do it. And so I switched to them and got the loan from Bank of America on the house for
I
whatever.
thought you got mad at me and that's
No,
why
no.
you left.
No, you wanted me to do it on a personal note rather than real estate.
Ah,
And I felt that a loan to remodel the house should be a real estate loan, and I wanted the property to be encumbered and not me personally. And Bank of Ricard would do it, and so I did, but it wasn't a very happy 2-3 year relationship.
I don't think it was that long.
I don't think it was.
When did Savings Bank come here?
In November of '77.
Oh,
Yeah, I applied for the architect's job, but the girl that did it did an absolutely wonderful job.
When she was dating the president at the time, too.
Oh, was that? Well, had I known that, I wouldn't have been as disappointed that I didn't get the job. I thought I was well qualified, but she did do an
Wonderful job.
outstanding,
Beautiful.
outstanding job.
Skip, neither you nor Glenn mentioned the little shops you had next door to me where the Mendocino market is. You completely ignored that little shop, and as did Glenn. Ha ha ha.
Guilty.
Guilty,
What little
yes.
shop was that?
It was a building where the Mendocino market is now.
Right.
Glenn owned that.
I remember that. What was it?
Oh, well, no, I was in there, that's
that
right,
right?
that's
You
right.
were.
No, that's right, the body experience, okay, what ended up happening? If you understand, we were candle makers, and aside from a candle maker, you typically did soaps and stuff like that, it kind of related. And one year, we either smoked too much on the way to market or whatever, we had put way too many orders in for soap and body products and things like that. So that was the birth of the body experience, which was in Glen's building underneath David Jones. Well,
Yes.
actually, well, David Jones bought it from you. didn't
No,
he?
he bought it from Alvin, I sold it to
Oh,
Alvin.
that's right, yeah. And so that's where the body experience started until we moved on the corner, and then we put it upstairs and the melting pot downstairs, yes. And, but I love the years so that we used to run a hose through
Yes.
through your
Water
yard
glass.
because the Heiser well was on the other side and we were over here. So we ran a hose through Clyde's backyard to take water from Heiser. And I don't think the Thompsons knew that we were doing that, but anyway, we did it. But
You should be
Clyde was
sitting up here
a
too,
good
Clyde.
neighbor.
Pardon?
You've been here a lot longer than any of us here.
Oh, just a little while.
Running the post office.
Just a little while.
Right.
And Glenn had a little, your shop was also in that same building when you owned it, didn't you?
No,
have
I
a
didn't
little-
have a shop.
Oh, you just
No,
owned it?
That was the
I-
cheese company was
I
before.
originally was gonna remodel it to live in it. And then
Oh, yeah.
that's what the plans were, I was gonna live in the whole place. And then I was able to buy the building that Circus in
Oh,
now.
I see.
And I said, well, it's got a better view, so
Yeah.
I converted it into a commercial building in the cheese shop. Were you there before the cheese shop or during?
No, after the cheese shop.
Oh, after, okay. Yeah, I remodeled it in a cheese shop.
Cheese shop went from Century 21.
No, they came directly into,
Then they went up to.
Then they
Oh, they went from
Yeah.
there up
Yeah.
to Century 21.
because I remember I wasn't finished with the building and I was on vacation, the first vacation I had, and
Okay.
they were contacting me and they wanted to absolutely have the building. And,
Okay.
you know, so it got
The
kind
old
of-
age is hell.
But I didn't have a building, I didn't have a business in there. It was a cheese shop and then.
I
a melting
remember you
pot.
owned it.
And then Alvin, I know, and then there was a antique restoration that came in after, you were after the chief.
Who was that?
It was after me, probably
Yeah.
because Alvin, when
And then
there
Alvin-
was the Mendoza blow up, is
Yeah.
when Alvin and Jeanette
Approached me about the building.
about
yeah.
the market.
Right. So they insisted on wanting to buy it, and actually thinking about it being a butcher shop, I thought maybe it'd be best if they owned it.
Yeah,
Rather than
right.
me coming back to get rid of the smells if they ever,
Yeah.
if
Yeah,
they ever closed.
exactly, yeah.
But that worked out fine for everybody.
So what's, one of the questions we have here also is,
There's a
so,
question from the audience.
oh, good.
Well, maybe you're gonna cover it.
Well, no, go ahead.
Listing,
Go ahead.
But I was gonna ask if you could talk a little bit about what your customers were like in the 70s and early 80s. I mean, the out-of-town customers that you had, how that's different from today.
Well, I'll feel that to some extent. Part of the thing is that, number one, where we were off of Main Street was you got the kind of customer who was investigative. rather than just doing, you know, the Hollywood Main Street approach, so to speak. They wanted to find out something about Mendocino. And like I said, that the cable coming down the highway, we used to have in the 70s the absolute most wonderful, what we call carriage tree. These are people who were relatively affluent, who came here because there wasn't telephones, there wasn't cable, you could drop out. So when you came to a bed and breakfast, you were there.
Little
There
River
were-
Inn,
there
they
were
didn't even
no-
have telephones.
There weren't phones in the rooms. There wasn't televisions. I mean, we had, I remember when we rented in town, we were like the social place because we had an antenna. There was 2 channels out of Eureka. That you would either get the sound and no picture, or picture or no sound. One or the other. But everybody'd crash at our house. It was actually down at where, well, Sip and Sup.
Sipping something.
Yeah.
Um,
It was a soup, it was a
The soup
restaurant.
place.
Next to the used bookstore.
which was also a real problem, because I had a real problem eating with Great Danes. And we had a litter of 12 pups in what was one of the dining rooms. Now, if you've ever had Great Dane puppies, it's not the most clean environment in the world, and so we just covered this floor with newspapers and let the pups at it. So every time Barbara would want to sit us in that area, I'd say, I'd rather not, could I have a table over here?
Memories
Yeah.
Could anybody say how our customers have changed now compared to what we had then? Or what changes have you seen?
I've seen less customers, and the
Then, go ahead.
then, and they're not as affluent.
And that's most recent times.
Last four years. Because I started in '84 and had a wonderful clientele that, luckily for me, money was no object for a lot of them.
Yep.
And so sold a lot of jewelry and fine art for many years. So I'm still selling jewelry and fine art, but just not like I did before.
How about the products in town? What's changed? The original stores that we had here, Colorform Toys, for instance, was really a different type of toy store. You had
Oh,
all
it's
kinds of
European.
handmade,
Yeah, it's European
Right,
wooden
handmade
toys.
toys,
Yeah,
wooden
handmade
toys.
toys primarily,
yeah.
yeah. And I sold that, which is a lesson that somebody should know if they buy a business, is that you don't change a business. I sold it to somebody who completely changed the whole
Right.
concept.
Well,
the
part of
business.
that problem, because they were old customers of mine, when we were out drinking one night, and they were living in Los Altos and wanted to move up here. And just in passing, I said, well, you want to buy a kite store?
Oh, no, but I sold Colorform before that, and then I think you bought, didn't you buy?
No, they bought the kite store, and then she became pregnant, so then they bought, I thought they were the ones that bought Colorform.
No,
No,
incorporated.
people
That
I
was
bought
Bob
from-
and Becky, wasn't it? Bob
Yeah,
and Becky?
Bob
Yeah.
and
Yeah, no, they didn't. I think they might have bought the toy store from people I sold it.
Oh, that's
Yes,
right,
they
okay,
did.
okay.
They did.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
Right,
Yeah.
they bought it from the people you sold.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they went into trains and
Completely changed it.
everyday
Yeah.
items, and then
But
Rite
you-
Aid came in, or they had things that they were selling for, less than they were paying for the cost,
The kite store though, didn't that eventually go to the toy store also?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they got all.
Well, no,
You
I moved, when I redid that building, the old bus barn, and the kite shop went in where the toy store is. I moved it down on the corner into that space. And then Bob and Becky bought that from
Okay.
me, and
And they
the
probably
toy
did it.
store, and incorporated it all
Okay.
into one thing, and that's how the toy store began back when.
Might add, that toy store's still going, and I believe the owner's here.
Yes, she is.
Right.
And we're back to European wooden toys.
All right.
But you're not selling kites. Oh, okay,
Big part of my business.
good, I know, it's windy, that was one of our January months in Hawaii. I'm sitting there flying kites and I'm going like, why aren't we flying kites in Mendocino?
Oh, we had big contests at one
Oh,
time out in the
geez,
headlands,
yes.
kite flying.
Voila.
Yeah, we should.
An interesting part about the cable, coming down, I guess Pete used to have an antenna on his
Yeah.
roof too, and he could get the 2 channels.
Yep.
And I came into town one night, it was one of the big fights between Muhammad Ali and Frazier, something of, I don't remember what it was, but I came into town to get something out of Ragtime, which was right next door to the bar. And people were all the way across the street, looking in the window at the fight. I went in, I said, holy Christ, what's going on? I had to park down here and walk down to get it, and I went out to see what was going on. And I was watching a fight from out in the middle of the street. Actually, it was on the sidewalk. So I ordered a beer, and what they were doing is they were passing it over the heads, and you send the dollar back. And it was amazing. But
The only television in town, right?
Yeah, it was the only one.
Well, but see, that would be the only reason that Pete would stay open, was so he could
Yeah,
watch
had
the
1,000
television,
people
because
out
where he
there, yeah.
lived, he didn't have television.
Exactly.
And if it was not busy at 5 o'clock, he had no business to Coombe to say, well, it's gonna get busy at 7.
And the other thing is, when the fight was over, he climbs up in the stool and turns it off.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm going,
Go
bye.
home,
Where was the birdhouse store and how long was that in business? Wasn't there a birdhouse?
Yeah,
store?
there was.
And it's amazing how many people remember that.
Mhm.
Because especially my new location,
Papa.
everybody swears to God that that's where it was. It wasn't, it's where
Right.
the shoe store.
Where what? Oh,
A
the,
line,
oh, the new shoe store?
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
that's where Papa Bird's was.
Okay.
And they have deja vu now, the people
hat
that
store.
started the Papa Bird.
Okay.
But they actually sold it to another young lady who ran it
Yes,
for.
and then she took it to
Was
Fort
it-
Bragg,
was he-
and it died a not a pleasant death in Fort Bragg.
I can't remember his last name, it was Steve.
Steve and Debbie
Yes.
With the new people?
were the ones that I
started.
knew when we moved here in
They started
'89,
it.
because
Okay.
I bought some stuff from them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it was Steve and Debbie,
And
and
they
I
did
think
quite
they
well.
went back east.
Yeah.
They did very well.
Yeah, they did quite well.
Well, James and Marilyn and they were good friends, and
Uh-huh.
they bought their businesses pretty much at the same time,
Uh-huh.
Out of This World and
Oh.
Papa Bird,
Yeah.
kind of at the same time.
There was a map of the businesses in town when I got here. And granted, you had to, pay to get on it. It wasn't everyone.
Right.
But it was the majority of businesses. And I don't believe there was 20.
Oh, no.
Originally,
And now, if you
12,
take
yeah.
a look at it, most people get off of it because they have to unfold it so many times that the people can't, they might as well carry the phone book. So when you're talking about the fact that you didn't even remember Papa Bird's, a lot of businesses, sticks, stones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a wonderful.
There's a
that was
lot
great-
of businesses that have come and gone for legitimate reasons of it wasn't fun.
well, remember Don Schneider had the one where Sticks was, and the
Sure.
massage place in Antiques and all part of his.
Matt Rowland was in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And jewelry store.
Well, but Matt Rowland was,
Clothing store before that.
well, but he came and lived with us at 14 as a potter.
Right.
Because my partner had raised Matt in Sacramento. Where talk about clothing, well, the story went is that they were not very affluent whatsoever. That he put the kids to bed and washed their clothes so they had clean clothes to wear to school the next day, because that's all they really had. But Matt came over and potted for us for a long time. And he's an exquisite potter. But he's also, he followed in his father's footstep, which was that theatrical production stuff.
But he had a jewelry store for a while
He did.
too. He sold jewelry.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
After the clothing store was in where the massage place is now.
Yeah.
How long was Wind and Weather in the water tower and articles? What year did they?
Wind Weather started in 75.
Yeah.
Was that Barry started that?
Barry
Barry
started
Cusick started that.
Right.
And then he helped took over, released the laundromat also.
Oh, right.
And then they lost the water in 75, 76. But he kept Wind and Weather for 2 or 3 years, and then he opened up the restaurant.
Brandon's.
Brandon's,
Brandon's.
right, Brandon's.
And he sold that to Mike and Kath, and Mike and Kath ran it in the water tower for, I guess they got out of there in 99.
Mike
Mike
Rogers.
Rogers, Kath Island, yeah. And by that time, the Wind and Weather was a huge operation that was mainly mail order. And so the amount that came through the door was very small compared to what was going out through the postal service.
Right.
Yeah, big difference.
But they had large operations in Fort Bragg.
Right.
Big-
Oh, yeah.
And it
And a
was-
huge mail order business.
Yes.
It was, and a lot of people in Fort Bragg were employed there.
They
So
had-
when they sold and it closed,
Yeah.
it was devastating for Fort Bragg.
There was like
They moved to
35
South
people.
Carolina, the operation.
We got a big operation in North
There was
Carolina.
35 people working for them when they closed.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Steered the
yeah.
place.
It was big,
There were a lot.
But Don did a good job turning it around to be,
profitable.
I was gonna use the word viable.
Good thing Mike isn't here right now.
Mike knew that though.
No, I know that.
It's true, Mike knew that he, he could not do the things that you needed to do.
And he was still part of it, actually, when
Yeah.
Don Snyder bought
Sure,
it, too.
yeah. And I think Don, just happily went off into the sunset with having found a buyer that would, because he really wasn't tuned to continue to operate.
It's just one of those interesting things of how things change. There was a disagreement about the value of the property, the water tower, and the landlord had known that Mike Rogers had loved that water tower for a long time. It had been his central place, he used it on his catalogs and everything. And the landlord didn't quite understand that Mike Rogers wasn't making those decisions anymore, that Don was. And so Don went over and said, you're charging too much. And he said, no, we're doing fine. He said, well, you can have it then, and he walked away. And it took him 6 months to find somebody who came even close to paying that price.
Yeah.
And the difference was that one was kind of an emotional involvement in the business location, and the other was pure business. It just didn't make as much money because he was comparing it to the entire operation.
Well, the same reality happened with me in closing the melting pot when we did.
That's right.
I had an absolute wonderful lease with who the person had been my client as an architect and had a wonderful 30-year relationship. However, when you take mathematics against the initial figure, it got to the place that I was paying $13,000 a month. Now, and that's a big nut to crack. Besides your employees, $120,000 for employees and $13,000 a month for rent. It's like, who am I working for?
A little different than 1977. right?
Tell me,
Yeah.
or 79?
Or
Oh, that's
79.
right. We're 78 is when we went to Hawaii for 6 weeks in January. You know, you'd save all year long, so you had that money to buy the airline ticket. Because back in those days, you could have campers in Hawaii, and we'd go over and rent a camper, and you could do the whole island, sleep on the beach, shower on, these were hippies in the 70s.
A good question that they have on here, especially for those of you who got here really in the early 70s. How were you perceived by the locals when you first got here? What did they think of you? There were a lot of hippies, et cetera, that had moved into the area.
About the same.
Ed, well, you look like, you're right. Yeah.
About the same.
Well, I think-
It's different. It's different. Miles Paley was my landlord. He was a very generous gentleman, but we didn't speak anything other than what you had to speak. There wasn't any kind of a friendship. He was positive that I was going to steal the doorknobs and disappear at night. That's what he'd seen. This was a town that had been inundated by free love, free this, free that, and it took a big toll on this town. Homer's Market really he got run out of business.
Yeah.
And,
From the stealing and things.
yeah,
like
it was not
Right.
good. It was not good. People had a distorted view of what was acceptable behavior. And they really did believe that the boathouses that were down on Point Beach were anybody's. And they would take them over and live in it or do what they wanted with it, take the wood. And those were old fishermen's
You're
houses.
talking the old Portuguese beach down
Yeah,
there?
yeah, and it was, it didn't take a genius to watch this and realize that this was not good. And it caused a lot of uneasiness. And they had seen these folks come in, go out, come in, go out. And so I could understand their point of view just watching it.
Clyde, you were
Took a
here
while.
then, you were in business in the post office. Must have been hard on the locals.
Yeah, it certainly was. It was totally different than anything we'd ever experienced. You can imagine how we felt when Manson came in
Yeah.
with his busload.
Right.
You can imagine, remember that, Ed? It was totally different, and it was hard to understand. We simply didn't understand, let's put it that way. That's the exact explanation.
Right.
So,
There was a whole thing that just, San Francisco got nasty somewhere in 68, 69, and they just, all the kids who came from all over the United States, the San Francisco area, they just started coming up here. And
yeah, that's
they
what
all
happened.
came up
They did
for,
start coming up.
yeah, and they came up for different reasons, for different, I don't know, they came up with different values. Some stayed, some didn't. They all made a mark of some sort, and it wasn't all positive. Most of the people that I know that came in that couple of years are gone.
Yeah.
They moved on to other things. They found out what inheritance really was. And I found out I didn't have one. So it's just interesting. I think that the perception changes if you stay with what you do and you be honest with people. And Miles became a very good friend of mine, and I loved listening to his stories about Mendocino during the 40s and the 50s. It's an excellent part of history. I really enjoy it. I got to know Fogey Gomes, and because of Fogey, I got to join the fire department.
Which you're still in.
Still in. I am now an assistant chief. Because of local politics, Norm Duvall won for supervisor in 1978.
Yeah.
And that was a very big thing because there was a big controversy about Save Our Homes and such, the building code wars. And so it was the first time I'd ever voted for somebody who had won anything, which is a different thing because all of a sudden when you lose, you can be self-righteous, and you can say, now he's going to mess up. But when your guy wins, it's different because there's things that actually have to happen. And I got a seat on the review board, and I did that for 10 years. That was horrible. That was really, really horrible. There's Mother May I, and the rules are written on soft butter. It really was not good.
How about you, Larke, when you got here?
Well, when I first arrived, the first few times I came up, I was staying, I used to stay at the Seafoam Lodge, and Dean Kreth used to always be
Yeah.
there. And finally, after about the second time, he says, well, what are you doing? And I told him that by this time I'd secured some leases, and I told him I was going to open a toy store. So he used to take great pride in taking all of his guests around to have them introduce me to the crazy kid who's going to open a toy store in Mendocino. And actually, I didn't have the experiences that being harassed. I didn't have things that people would come in to take, and people who had kids appreciated the toys at the time. And then when I went into the clothing business, things had started to change a little bit. and I didn't have clothes that people would
Good steal.
would want,
Yeah.
they wouldn't want to be seen in, so. So, and then when the hotel came in, everything sort of started changing a little bit, you know. People were, but I'd say I had a pretty positive response from the locals that were here. I lived in town for quite a bit. I lived next to Bogey Gums and one of my neighbors across the street. And, I guess he was in his late 80s, he and his wife, and I used to go over and, you know, sit in their dining room and have a glass of wine, and they'd sit there and talk, and he talked about one time he had been all the way to Elk, and that was the furthest he'd ever been in his life. And his wife had been to Albion, but she didn't want to go down the hill and cross the river. But, you know, just the insights of how people live.
Oh, yeah.
It was really great. The old timers are what's really missing here. We used to go to the post office and pull forth. All the old timers would be sitting around telling stories.
I think what had evolved from the hippie era, so many of them stayed, were business people,
Oh,
and
now,
nice
right.
people. Still here.
Right.
Well,
Still here.
the nice thing I liked about it was that the locals didn't really prejudge. I never felt any there was always an acceptance. We became a local store. People came on a regular basis. It was their Sunday stroll in town to come by and see what you're doing, chat a while, and move on. And so I've always felt an integral part of the community. You know, you go into Mendoza's and you know, back in those days, you know, Alice and working at the counter, you know, and if your partner isn't with you, what's going on, what that's sick, and what, you know, and it's been the easiest place. I couldn't think of being anyplace else. Not kidding.
How about you, Susan? Any comment on that, or?
Well, I always felt welcome from day one. And it was nice to have a nice local business also that's, I still have 26 years later. So I appreciate that.
I found when I got here, and when Savings Bank was very young here in this town, I actually wasn't accepted by the locals as much because they had always all banked at Bank of America. And they knew everybody there, and all the tellers knew their business and everything. But I found the new people hated Bank of America. And it was the time when Bank of America was the bad guy. It was almost like it was part of government. And so I found I've got a lot of the different people in Mendocino to start banking at Savings Bank just because it wasn't Bank of America. That's kind of
I did. I left Bank of America to go to the Savings Bank.
Were any of you here when there were buildings on the headland side of the road?
No.
they're all gone.
That was long gone.
Never
And
mind.
was
Clyde
there-
was.
It was,
I was.
Clyde was. The buildings on the south side of Main Street.
I worked at that post office on the south side of it.
Until it moved over.
That was the first post office I worked in.
That was Don Burleson as a postmaster. right?
No, Asa Bishop, no,
Oh,
no,
Asa
that
Bishop.
was
Oh,
Bishop
that
before
you're-
Don.
yeah.
Yeah, Ace Bishop.
Don's a newcomer.
And then we moved across the street, and that was Don Burleson.
Ah.
And then we moved up there on
Right.
Ford and Ukiah.
Were you related somehow to Asa Bishop?
Asa Bishop
No.
was I
No.
was.
Susan behind you, Susan Warner,
Step uncle.
step on.
He was your step uncle?
Yeah, I'm Susan Warner, Lincoln Warner's daughter.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And Asa Bishop was your,
My step uncle.
he was my first boss. Yeah, I remember all of those buildings on the south side of Main Street.
It was shortly
Several.
after East of Eden that they went down.
Pardon?
The movie.
Yeah.
The movie East
Oh,
of Eden.
yes,
It was
yes,
after
yeah.
that they took them down because it fit the scene because with the buildings on that side and the ocean behind, it could have been the flat Salinas Valley, which it was in the movie.
One day they moved in with all of their equipment, rushed up and tore down the Mendocino post office sign and put up their own sign. I wish you could have seen your uncle that day. Oh my goodness. He rushed out and what he didn't say and do. Oh.
hear they buried all the electric wires, and did that make any difference
Yeah.
in people coming to town or anything?
They did that in 1980.
After we were here.
86?
No,
Early
later,
80s.
later than that.
Wow.
Early 80s,
Early-
maybe
early-
mid-80s.
No, way after we came in
We came
'86.
in '89.
Really?
Yeah,
They were
88.
burying them
Oh,
then.
no,
They're
not
still burying them then?
Uh-huh,
Could have been,
yeah.
could have
I
been.
don't, I honestly don't.
January of '89 is when we.
I mean, it
And
doesn't.
were they here, was the
And
wires
they
here
were
then?
in the processes of
It didn't,
burying.
it didn't really make
Yeah.
a whole lot of difference in terms of the quality or the number of customers, the fact that we are a now PG&E type of town. Actually, I personally aesthetically
I
like.
loved it.
I like the square poles and the big old stuff, because all you had was electric wires. It's not like towns that have cables and you've got these miles and 2 and 3 and 4 deep wires going from pole to pole. Mendocino just had the 3 wires, went down this street and up around this way and this way.
I
remember
angry about that because there's a cable running there and there's a phone line going on there and I'm real happy they're under.
I'm sure you
They
are.
don't fall on people and I get to stay home.
We'd moved here a couple or 2 or 3 years before, and I remember I knew this was just gonna be the most entertaining town forever, because the controversy, there's controversy about everything, there was a group of people who were incensed because the birds wouldn't have a place to sit on that.
How about incorporation, when Ed was gonna be the new mayor?
That was always that was always controversial.
That was a very controversial.
Incorporation was incorporation failed 5 times in this town.
Right.
And it failed when it was a prosperous town, and it failed when it was not so prosperous town. Just before I got here in 1970, they had just had an election in 1969, and it failed. I don't know what the count was, but I know a lot of the people who were running for office or trying to get that through. And it was a pretty good mix of some newcomers and some old, but they were mostly on the newer arrivals. Maybe they'd been here 10 years, 15 years tops. And it was perceived as an art center thing. And it failed. And it didn't come back up again until 80, 81, something like
I know
this.
it came up several times.
And that's the time that it actually,
One vote or something.
well, it was worse than that, the joke. It actually came across as, it passed, and I was the top vote getter.
Right.
And what they forgot to say was they didn't count the absentees. And everybody knows absentees are more conservative. And the next day, it turns out that we lost by 3 votes.
Oh, 3 votes.
And
Okay.
so, it was an interesting thing. Bud Cam came by, he was the first person that told me, because I went home early. And he was the first person that told me, he could not wait to tell me. He says, good news is incorporated, bad news, you're the mayor. And I said, you're kidding me. He says, yeah, it's too bad it only won by 1 vote or something like
Yeah,
that.
right.
And I said, geez, okay. And I really had a miserable day. It just was not a fun thought of trying to get a town like this. But by 1. It was
1
not
vote,
exactly
right,
a
right.
majority of support. And so I was really relieved, but I really felt bad for the town. I thought it would be better incorporated. Obviously, it would have problems. Obviously, it would have economic problems.
No.
Obviously, it would have more responsibility problems. Now, this town is abandoned of governmental authority, and it seems to function well in that dysfunctional state. I mean, it does. If you just walk down this street and say, where are the sidewalks, and what condition are they in, it's lawsuit city if you're a city. But we're not, and they don't sue the county that often, and when they do, the county wins most of them, or they at least push it back. We would be, every issue would be a hard-fought thing. I don't know where it would be now. There's so many changes in the people who are living here now. The houses cost so much more. Their opinions of things are going to be different. But I do know that it would be in line for a lot of grants. I do believe in the last 20 years or so, we've only got a couple of grants. There's no organization to receive these. And Fort Bragg has historical grants up the kazoo, because they have a person sitting in the office that writes them.
Well, remember when we did the business and professional council?
BPC.
About 4 or 5 times.
Until we also finally realized that nobody had ever bothered to file a 503A
Whatever,
or whatever, and that like, oh my God, we've been taking people's money and doing things with it, and those of us that were involved were like, ooh, it's like, Chamber, would you like to have us?
I think Mary Lynn was one of the founders of that at one time.
That's when they were gonna move the beacon or something. That's
Yeah.
what brought everybody kind of together to do something or another. And
NBPC? No, that started because of the missing 4th of July.
The missing parade.
We had a 4th of July parade in '76 because it was a bicentennial, everybody all excited. And,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it was mostly newcomers who got excited. And so they said, we gotta have a parade, gotta have a parade. And so there was a parade of sorts. And it started in the right, went up the hill, and they went around twice because there was only like 25 of them. And even the fire department would not respond that they were gonna do it. They said, and then the day of the thing, they said, well, do you want to do it? Yeah, I want to do it. Sure, let's go. So they jumped in their fire trucks and they got to the front of the parade and they led the parade. And everybody had a wonderful time. And in 1977, you can look it up, there's no parade.
oh, I didn't realize.
No, there's no parade. Everybody kind of went out, waiting for the parade.
Yeah, because I remember I did the poster for that 4 and all for '76. One, I put myself in a trash bag and went around as Mendocino trash and won a trophy that somebody had built, these hand-built trophies that they awarded. Oh,
If
yeah.
anybody's got a blue ribbon from '77, suspect it.
Well, I'm afraid the time's up. I've enjoyed this very much.
We have coffee and cookies in the kitchen.
Thank you all.
Maybe we'll have to have a part 2.
Yeah, maybe.
It's nice and lively.
Is there a part 2 today?
No, not today.
I've been back. I tried to get you 2 years ago.
No,